that's one of my cultural connections. You can go ahead and drop one of yours in the chat, or I'll pick on Dr. Kemp and ask her to share to get the conversation moving as well.
I can share. Actually, I grew up in Carson, which was a very diverse community. So I actually grew up with being introduced to all cultures and was very fortunate to have African American teachers, white teachers, Asian teachers, Latino teachers, all throughout my whole educational experience. And to me, being that I lived in a culturally diverse area, it was very memorable to me because it made me realize growing up that we all have great culture within our ethnicities and within our history, and it made me appreciate the diversity that I had to experience.
Thanks, Dr. Kemp. As a couple come in, I want to read them out loud. We have a Zoom users meeting my aunt's friend who was a teacher the first time I experienced a Black teacher. I was 15. In my high school, we had a youth mentor who would take us on hikes and do community service. I love being a part of nature and helping our community. In elementary school, my principal was Latino. I really feel like he understood our community. Also, one time I missed the bus to the beach for a field trip and he drove me all the way there. Oh, the days when things were different, Philip. um, those things resonate. And when this was a discussion in our previous meeting, people shared things like, I remember seeing my culture when it was Black History Month. I remember seeing my culture when we did like a piñata at a party. I remember seeing my culture when there was an event that centered around their culture, but not in everyday classroom experience, school experience, instructional experience. Um, or similar to Whitney sharing that one day the cafeteria worker made Portuguese bread, sweet bread for the staff, and it felt like home. It's these isolated things that aren't sorry, rephrase, that isn't our curriculum, our instruction, our pedagogy, being culturally relevant to whoever we serve and whatever that looks like. So I really wanted to set the stage today, or we really wanted to set the stage today to consider how cultural relevance is important in our academic experiences. Next slide, please. So there is a resource folder for everybody today. Our trusty Stephanie is going to drop it in the chat, and she already has. There's a QR code there. And also in the resource folder, there is a Google slide that I would like everybody to open. And the last two slides on the Google slides are parking lot. And while we have office hours for the community of transformational practice, we don't have them for peer learning. So we want to make sure that if you have some burning question that doesn't get responded to or answered during our peer learning webinar, that we've got those tucked away and we can respond to them. And if there is time here today, then we'll close out with responding to those questions. So please hop in and open those Google Slides and access those resources for our learning today. Next slide, please. So today we're looking at student voice and cultural relevancy, and because they show up in our steering committee, and because they show up in our needs and assets assessment. And so one of the things that we have discussed as we've looked at our 10-step blueprint to community schools, as we've looked at the community schools framework, is student and community and family voice are really important. And they're really the driving force of the work that we're doing in community schools. So today we're going to dive in specifically to that student voice and further share our experiences as to how we gather that data and how we interpret and analyze the data that we get from those we most immediately serve, our students. Next slide, please. So as a reminder, the framework is a 4x4, and one of the core commitments of the framework is a commitment to powerful culturally proficient and relevant instruction. And as we know that there's not only instruction that happens in the classroom, but there's that hidden curriculum that happens throughout the entire campus. And we want to make sure that we're being cognizant of that learning that happens when the students are on campus from 7:30 to 2:30 or whatever your bell hours are. Next slide, please. So we're going to ground this conversation through a talk from Chris Emden. He's a professor at one of the New York Ivy League schools, and he talks about what he calls the 5 C's of relevant pedagogy. And as we watch this video, I ask that you take a note, just one note about each C that resonates with you. He does speak quickly, so dial in, get your pen and paper or your phone or your keyboard ready, and get ready to listen to Dr. Emden.
So I am advocating for moving beyond student-centered pedagogy and even transformative and powerful ideas like culturally relevant pedagogy, because those words have been used and misused and abused and co-opted and distorted. I'm arguing for reality pedagogy. And so what is reality pedagogy? Reality pedagogy is teaching and learning based on the reality of the student's experience. See, while student-centered pedagogy from Dewey and Piaget and culturally relevant pedagogy from Gloria Ladson-Billings has such power and potential, it makes no sense if the teaching is based on what our perspectives is of what the culture is. I can't be culturally relevant if I'm teaching you based on what my perception is of your culture. I can't be student-centered if I say, this is what I think the student wants and needs, so let me give them that. And what happens is our guilt and our experiences and our words make us think that we know what they need. We think poverty, we think crime, and they see rainbows and sunsets. I've had students where I actually went to the classroom and thought, you know what, let's give these kids some cameras to capture their experiences in the world outside of the classroom. And I expected certain things. I'm a science educator, so I thought they'd take pictures of rotting windows, and we could talk about weathering, and we could really talk about oxidation processes. I was like, they're gonna show me all this terrible stuff, and then we're gonna use that to turn them on to school and schooling. Well, guess what happened? We gave them the cameras, they came back, and we literally saw sunsets over the projects. We saw big brothers holding the little sisters' hands, walking them to school. We saw the matriarchs in the community telling stories. We saw all these images of beautiful and powerful and exciting things, and that's how youth see their lives. But we come there to teach them thinking of it as oppressive. And that disconnect causes us not to be effective. So reality pedagogy has 5 C's. The first C is this idea of co-generative dialogues. What are co-generative dialogues? Simple. Co, together, generative, we generate, dialogues. I'm arguing that in every classroom, why don't we create an opportunity for the teacher to pick 4 students that represent different demographics in the classroom and engage with them outside of the classroom about what their experiences are about what's going on in the class, with a goal of co-generating a plan of action for improving the class. So for example, you're always yelling. I've heard this actually. No, I never yell. No, you do. And when you do that, I don't want to learn anymore. Next time you're in that classroom, check that. And when I'm about to yell, I look around and those 4 faces are staring at me. And they realize that I've empowered them by allowing them to give me some critique of my instruction. And then I maneuver and change my instruction to not do what they found oppressive. Co-generative dialogue, asking youth to co-generate ideas about improving instruction and giving them the opportunity to critique the instruction. So you're not teaching from your point of guilt, but you're teaching from their perspectives about what's powerful. That's the first C. The second C, this idea of co-teaching. We think of co-teaching as having one teacher in the classroom, and then you have the co-teacher who gets the coffee and makes the copies, right? But let's move that idea beyond that and say co-teaching as in letting youth teach the class. Give a young person a homework assignment that is not answer questions 45, 1 through 4, multiple choice, But actually, here's the teacher's manual, here's a sample lesson plan, go home and write a lesson plan. Use your own examples, and then come back into the classroom and teach that lesson. And let the teacher sit where the student is, and the student be positioned where the teacher was, and let there be a different type of exchange. Let the students know that you understand that they are the expert in how to deliver the information to each other, and you are only the content expert. Give them the opportunity to have voice. Give them the opportunity to see how tough it is to be a teacher. But the idea here is to change the structure, to give them agency, because they will inform you on what the best practice is. That's the second C of co-teaching. The third C is this idea of cosmopolitanism, a broad philosophical tenet that sounds like a mouthful, but we're going to whittle it down to something really simple, which is interrogate the ways youth communicate with each other outside the classroom and utilize them inside the classroom. What do I mean? If youth outside of the classroom are using head nods and handshakes as a way to combine and connect to each other, this is part and parcel of gang culture that creates an anti-school identity. Why can't we use those same structures and associate them with a pro-school identity? That when you score a question right, you can have a 4-minute handshake if that's what you want to do. Or you can do the Dougie if that's what you like to do. But that the forms of expression and celebration welcome the ways that youth engage and communicate outside of the classroom. The ways they have responsibility for each other outside of the classroom should be the same inside. When they work in groups, and we assign them to groups only for that 2-minute activity, when outside of the classroom they ride the bus together, live together, wake each other up in the morning, dwell together, why can't we create partnerships of students in classrooms that can travail the course of the academic year, or all 4 years of high school? Creating a pseudo-family for students who oftentimes have a broken family structure. The third C, cosmopolitanism. The fourth C, this idea of context. Context means a culturally relevant or responsive teacher has a perception of the culture of the student. But the reality is that experiences of students in the Bronx or Oakland or Johannesburg or Nairobi are all different. There are certain traditions that are the same, but they're distinct things, they're nuanced things about culture that are very different. So when we're talking about context, we're saying in the instruction, be hyper-focused on the immediate communities the students are from. You don't have to go and get the microscopes at the back of the class from the back of the class. You can name the back of the class a street corner in the community. Go to the corner of 183rd and Grand Concourse and pick up the microscopes. Go to Jane and Finch and pick up the textbooks. It's a seemingly superficial thing. But what it does for young people, it allows them to see that you're not imposing yourself on them. You're understanding that where they come from has value. When we talk about context, it also means not thinking of the academic space as a sanitized space. Context means who are the icons in the community? Is it the person who did that graffiti image? Is it the guy at the pizza store that knows everybody's name within a 12-block radius? If those people are powerful in the context of the community, then we cannot let them rest in the community. We must bring them into the school. Have them be a part of the instruction. Have them be an example. Have them talk about the science and mathematics in their life worlds. Context. And the last C is content. Really? You're a math and science educator and content is last? Yes. Because we put content first. We've dropped boulders on youth. And we've not gotten a chance to get them to actually connect. You cannot get to the content if you don't focus on the environment of the classroom. You can't focus on content if they don't have voice, if they don't have agency, if they don't have a stage, if they don't have a platform, if they don't see their life worlds outside of the classroom, inside of the classroom. If those things don't happen, content knowledge will not be developed. Few may get it, but we must realize that those who do get it become successful in spite of, not because of, our practices. In closing, when we talk about peace, and we talk about equity, and we talk about justice, we cannot have those things if students don't have an opportunity to have their voice heard. We cannot have those things if we are so laden with our guilt that we're wondering about being responsive in every single moment based on a false perception of what the kids are. We can't have them if you don't know the communities. You can't have them if you don't walk those streets and understand where the youth are coming from. Thank you.
Thank you. So everyone has one note for each C. And as I mentioned before, there is a Google slide in the resource folder to populate those notes for those 5 Cs and connect them to the 5 pillars. So for example, I was thinking about the first C, the cogenerative dialogue, and I thought immediately of our needs and assets assessment. The 4 focus group students in a classroom. It's exactly what we're talking about in collaborative leadership and practices. It's exactly what we're talking about when we're talking about active family engagement. Students are a part of the family. They're a part of the community that we are engaging. So as you take this time to populate your notes, and where does it fit? Where does it fit when he's talking about hyper focused on the immediate community? Hyper focused on the immediate community. The example of naming the corners of your classroom after street corners that the students know is the perfect example of bringing our community in as into the pedagogy, into the instruction, as being a part of the curriculum. So those, you can populate those notes. I see 3 partners in the Google Slides, and we can populate those as we move on. If anyone wants to unmute and share out, that works as well. Or if you want to drop it in the chat rather than use the Google Slide, that works as well. Okay, next slide, please. And that is our Google slide. Sorry, next slide, please. So as we think about the cultural relevancy, we're looking at how do we make sure that the students' choices and the way that they show up in the classroom is seen as culturally relevant, and not always maybe a negative behavior. How do we see their culture and their linguistics showing up in the classroom? And we want to consider it a part of who they are coming into the room. Next slide, please. So one of the ways that we can do this is looking at rings of culture. Dr. Shiraki Holly works with people that we know, such as Solution Tree, AXA, and these are the pieces of culture that we can consider as we're writing pedagogy, as we are planning our needs and assets assessment, as we are considering who our young people are when they are coming into our classroom. So one of the examples, if you dive into Dr. Shiraki Holly's book, is he has every adult sit down, or asks every adult sit down and consider, what is this ring of culture to me? How do I identify an age? And as a millennial and all the bad press that millennials get, I think about the age piece and what that means to be millennial when we walk into different spaces. And one of the instances, as I was discussing this with my staff in the past, was a teacher said, "Hey, I really don't get this online dating thing." And he said he was talking to a friend, and the friend goes, "Oh, that's how I met my wife." And the reason the teacher thought that was odd was because the friend was in similar age that he was, and it was a 60 and over crowd. We can't make assumptions, as Dr. Emden mentions, and that's what we have been doing in our instruction and in our pedagogy. And what we are doing, the way we are transforming schools, is to use our needs and assets assessment, is to use our students' voice and do this differently. Next slide, please. Another way, instead of rings of culture, to address this is a psychological framework around, and that is an acronym, addressing. It's considering the same types of cultures: age, developmental disability, disability acquired later in life, and so on, but a different way to frame it so that we can think about who's in our classroom and how we may frame things, but also how we build those relationships and maybe how we ask those questions so that we can better understand our students. Next slide, please. And our goal is to increase student engagement. It's to deal with the inequities in the classroom and to, as Dr. Shiraki Hawley says, is give outrageous love. He views the students who may be acting out in class as students who simply need more love. And the way that you show them that more love is to connect with their various rings of culture. Next slide, please. So when we're talking about our needs and access assessment, let's start with the student voice. Let's bring their cultures in by hearing from them. Next slide. As an example, I want to draw the alignment that our CCSP, your annual progress reports, are drawing the attention to the alignment. Student voice is a requirement in LCAP, but it's also a priority of our state superintendent, to the point where, as you see on the slide, he has developed a youth advisory council and leads that youth advisory council on a yearly basis. And this was the advertisement for this school year. And keep an eye out for next 2024 advertisement. Maybe your students want to apply to be on the youth advisory council, but this is an initiative aligned with this is a student voice is aligned with multiple initiatives in our state. Next slide, please. Gathering their voices. So we've talked about the needs and assets assessment, and the question that keeps coming up is, how do we do that? And we've said surveys, but also focus group, as Dr. Emden mentions, one-on-one interviews, students at the steering committee, student advisory committees, just separate student entities where they're not with adults, and then informal communication and observations. And we can use all these ways to gather data. Next slide, please. So one of the things that's come up as Dr. Kemp and I have been working with grantees is, how do we choose the students? And the question, or the way that we've been guiding, is that the students, or consider what priority or what topic you want from the students. So one of the things, examples, is experience over time. Maybe we want to hear how they have experienced our school up until 5th grade. If your school ends at 5th grade, maybe it's sitting down with just those 5th graders and understanding how they experienced their whole kindergarten through 5th grade time at your school, or 6th grade if you're a K-6, or maybe it's the end of 8th grade and the end of middle school. Maybe we're just doing focus groups by grade level. And then diversity. Invite students across grades is also an approach, academic performance and other cultural identifiers. And then we can randomize them using an online randomizer, an app, or even an Excel formula, and then take volunteers. We often know that if we volunteer, people don't want to participate, and that includes even adults. But additionally, the students who have something to say often volunteer. So we want to take volunteers as well. Next slide, please. And then how do we capture that? So one of the easiest ways to capture what our students share with us, video recordings and audio recordings, they're easy to set up and easy to digest. Obviously, the spreadsheets from surveys, and chart paper and images, word clouds, and remember to choose the right facilitator. And one of the reasons that this is extremely important is the relationship that they have to make sure that it is a safe place, and that the person who is facilitating can connect with the students. But the other reason these artifacts are extremely important is also for our messaging. So last Thursday, we talked about messaging out to our communities, messaging to families and caregivers, messaging to business partners, educational partners. But this creates artifacts that we can use when we're messaging to those educational partners. It gives us videos to share of what our students are saying. Next slide, please. So Dr. Kemp just dropped in a fixed Google slide so that the slide can be accessed. Sorry about that. She just dropped it in, and there is on slide 3, student voice questions, that examples that were shared from the STAC, examples that were taken from other places. But I wanted to get you all started so that we can partner with each other and share out student voice questions that we have used either in one-on-one interviews or in focus groups that are successful, and or questions that we're just thinking about, and we want to share those out so that we can see if other people are putting in some similar questions. So if you can now hop on slide 3, again, my apologies for that link not being accessible, and share out some of your student voice questions. We have separated them by grade, because as you can see, the first question is just a bit different based on the grade. Maybe if we're going to connect with our 1 to 5, our grades 1 to 5, we want to ask them to just tell us a story, versus asking our 9th graders just very direct, our 9th to 12th graders very directly, do you feel represented at school? So as I can see, somebody's already dropping in a question in the Google slide. We want to create this shared resource, because I know the topic of what questions can we ask has been coming up, and what do we want to know from our students. So we wanted to start with an example, and then we wanted to hear from you. I love the describe a dream school. I especially on the 1 to 5, I can only imagine what would come up from there. If you could change one thing about your school, what would it be? Couple others coming in the high school, areas.
There's one in the chat that says, well, actually 2. What would you like your teachers to know about you? And when do you feel belonging at school?
Those are great ones to add. I think we're going to see a couple of those things resonate later in the learning session, right, Dr. Kim?
Yes, and here's another one. What are some things that would make this school better?
And a couple others. What is your favorite memory from your academic career? Great question for seniors. Who do you identify with at school? Love that question. And have we done, oh goodness, have we done enough to prepare you for the future? I think those are great questions, and those are questions we can absolutely have fantastic focus groups around. And again, by grade level, including the diversity of not only our students' backgrounds, but their academic performance. Next slide, please. So I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Kemp as folks are still dropping in possible questions that they would have to share. She's going to dive into interpreting and analyzing that data that we get from our students.
Good afternoon, everyone. So the section that I'm about to go over is how can we interpret and analyze data based on student voices? Next slide, please. So just a quote that I just wanted to share. Student voice enables schools and to broader education community to learn from students how they see school and to build a better understanding of factors that affect student learning. Student voice is so important, no matter if it's primary with our elementary sweethearts or whether it's with our middle school and high school scholars. Besides always getting the voices from our staff and from our family, our students are the one actually experiencing the educational journey personally. So it's so important that when we collect data to make sure that their voice is included. Next slide, please. So as we prepare to review data for student voice, it's very, very important that before we even start reviewing data, that we make sure that we're going into looking at a data with no biases, right? We want to make sure that we have an open mind and that we are actually taking the information that we are getting, the data, at face value. So it's very, very important prior to reviewing student voice data that you make sure that you are setting the stage for a productive discussion. We want to make sure that we put out on the table any aspirations that you would like to get from the data or any apprehensions you feel about the data before looking at it. Also, you want to make sure that you have a discussion on what might the data actually reveal. So what strengths do we expect that the students may talk about? What improvements may we actually think the students may reveal to us? What are you most curious about the data? And these discussions are all done prior to review, because the most important part is having the discussions and putting it out on the table allows for your committee, your advisory council, who's ever looking at the data, to make sure that they have discussed everything possible so that the information is not looked at in a flawed manner. Next slide, please. So one of the ways that you can do this to set your mind mentally ready before you look at student voice data is known to as the ladder of inference. It is actually a mental model that is in Peter Singh's 5th discipline, and it speaks about what are the main aspects that you do when you are reviewing data. So number one, you know that there's a bunch of available data out there, right? Whether it's historical data, that's just a basic report card, discipline reports, referrals, available data, the qualitative data, that's like the student interviews, the focus groups, surveys that the students filled out. You're looking at what are the different forms of available data that we can actually get from students. The next thing you want to think about is, I'm going to select the data that is most pertinent to the priorities or to whatever I'm focusing on. So in this case, we're focusing on the community school framework and how these student voices help us with that framework to make sure that we're implementing I'm going to say transforming a school site to the community hub that we would like for it to be. Next, you have to think about, when we look at the data, how do we properly paraphrase the data? Making sure that we're looking at it from an objective lens, making sure we're picking out those words and those terms that the students are expressing to us that are important. And then evaluating what we're reading, and then we decide what to do next and have an action plan. So making sure that before you review the data, that everybody understands this is how we're going to look at the data. This mental model alone, again, is strictly for us to make sure that we don't have any biases, any negative mindset or anything before we read the data, because your mindset before you review the data can affect how you analyze the data. Next slide, please. So as you know, when you review data, you just do not look at it one time. You actually do multiple reviews of the data, because each time you're looking at it for a different reason. So the first time when you're reviewing student data, you're actually looking at it and you're thinking about certain questions in minds, like, through the data that we read so far, did you see what the strengths were at the district or the school site? What are the students saying as our biggest areas of growth? Do we notice any differences on how the students are answering based on their backgrounds? What makes you most proud about the data? What connections do you see in the data that's connected to priorities that we are currently looking at? And this is just reviewing it, just looking at it, getting an idea of what you're reading. The reason why you're doing this is because you want to make sure that you're focused on what are we trying to get out of reading this data? What feedback is most important to us while we're reading it? Can we see those assets that we have at our school? Can we see those opportunities for growth that we possibly have at our school? So this is first review of the data. Next slide, please. Once you're reviewing the data, you're going to have those important discussions. And being that the community school framework is an equity-based model, right? Because we want to make sure that we're meeting all the needs of all our students and families. We have to approach this discussion from an equity-centered mindset. So for example, if I'm looking at data and I'm noticing, wow, while I look at this, what are the key challenges as we prioritize what we need for the district? The follow-up question need to be from that is, which students are impacted the most by these challenges, right? Because each student group is going to be impacted in a different way. So those follow-up questions, especially looking at from an equity mindset, is very important as we are reviewing the data from student voice. Next slide, please. So we are going to do a student voice data activity. We're actually going to look at a video where we have students expressing having identity, agency, and belonging in their learning spaces. And during this video, if you have a piece of paper next to you, or if you take notes on your cell phone, or if you have a Post-it where you can drop some notes on, when you're looking at the video, I want you to pay really close attention and write down important information, which is our data, right? Important information that the youth are sharing about their experiences in spaces of learning. Next slide, please.
Who I am. I am a student, a young Black girl, standing for what she believes. In my school communities, I always wanted to belong. In elementary, I changed schools so often, it was hard to adapt. I always felt so out of place. Many others are like me, who just want a place to feel that connection.
I feel like I belong and matter in the school when I walk in the building and I get greeted by the principal, the staff, teachers, the security guards, like just everybody in the school know my name.
I feel like I'm really bonded to my teacher when they can tell us stories about their life and what they've been through. Like what it was like in their childhood, or if they ever got bullied in school.
I feel like I belong in my community in school when I am listened to.
When they welcome me and don't exclude me from activities.
When I am safe, seen, accepted. I learn when I'm empowered.
I feel like I can really belong and matter in school when I can disco.
My identity was formed in my many life experiences, such as goals I've achieved, failures that taught me right from wrong, or days where I had no choice but to fight and move forward. We young people build our identities in many different ways.
I can tell that others know and appreciate who I am when students can share their work and passions in a judge-free environment among peers.
My biggest passion is music and dancing, and I just love how the school lets everybody express themselves through their art.
I can tell that other people know and appreciate who I really am when I hang out with friends and when I do the newspaper job and say hello and I have a conversation.
There has to be a strong communication system, reaching out to all families whose language is not English as their first language, people who are literate in technology, as well as families who have a lack of resources.
I can tell I'm respected when I don't feel like I need to do extra in a class to feel like I belong or be properly supported with my academics.
I think it's very important to accommodate and acknowledge people whose minds think and process things differently in learning. Just make sure that everyone feels seen in your classroom, in your learning environment, and you'll see people flourish.
Agency is the feeling and confidence of knowing you can achieve a goal if you apply yourself. I know I can do it when my mentors speak to me, when my peers acknowledge me, and when I decide to keep trying and not give up. When teachers give me leadership responsibilities, I feel like it's my responsibility to take care of myself and others. When my community believes in me, I feel free to achieve my goals and dreams.
I have the confidence and power to make something I care about happen when I'm happy, when I have a lot of energy, when I have support from people who love me, and when I'm present.
When I'm able to give my input in clubs and activities and develop real outcomes for my school.
When I know my voice matters to someone. It wasn't until I learned who I really was that I had no choice but to elevate my voice. and there were people there ready to listen.
I feel powerful and confident to make something I care about happen when I have people alongside me that want to fight for the change that I want to see.
When I remind myself that it's really important to focus on my own opinion and care about my own well-being.
I also have that confidence and power when I know what I'm doing will help other people or the planet.
To all of our adults in schools and communities who are creating spaces for us to live and learn, you are not in this alone. We are ready to be a part of shaping our own lives, building that mutual respect, creating a learning place where we can flourish, so we can achieve much greater goals, knowing we can do what we set our minds to. We are in this together.
Next slide, please. So after listening to those amazing interview responses and student voice coming from how they feel when they are in learning spaces that they feel belonging to, that respect their identity, we're going to go into breakout rooms and we're going to discuss the information that you gathered from the responses of our youth. During that discussion, I want you to determine if there were any common themes that you heard from the voices of the youth. Based on our 4 pillars, so we have our integrated supports, collaborative leadership with our educators, community and family engagement, and extended learning opportunities and time. So when we're thinking about those 4 pillars, which pillars would be the most appropriate for the responses given by our youth? And then last, after your discussion, you guys are going to have about 4 to 5 minutes. You're going to choose a spokesperson to share your responses when returning to the main room. So this is what we're going to do for our activity. And right now we're going to break out into breakout rooms. So we have everyone back from our breakout rooms, and I hope you were able to have a great discussion about the video because the students on there did a great job with articulating how they were feeling. Breakout room 1, I think that was the group with Martha in it. Do you guys have a spokesperson?
I don't think we got a chance to select one.
Oh, okay. Is there anybody from the group willing to just share what they got from the video and any themes that they see that can be related to the 4 pillars?
This is Martha. The learning extended opportunities. You know, we tend to say that maybe it only happens after school, but we can have it during school. And that's when we can give students a voice. We can have groups of students like the presenter was mentioning, that we need to give students an opportunity to voice their concerns, to tell us how they feel, to be part of the decision making. And so for me, that will be one of, and also, the first one, taking care of the whole child too. Because through those conversations, we get to see what are their needs, what are their interests, tapping into their prior knowledge and experiences. So that's what we were talking about. And we really, enjoy every single student that was being interviewed in the video, but we really enjoyed the first one, the first young lady, because it made us really think about the importance of giving a student a choice, a voice. She was stating about how she learned so much through mistakes, and how she was articulating those experiences where now she gets to share with us. And we were talking that as community school teachers, we're at the beginning level. We need to provide those platforms for those kids, for our students to have a voice, to express their feelings. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Martha, for sharing. We really appreciate it. Is there a spokesperson for Breakout Room 2? Or anyone willing to share for the group? Don't be shy.
I was going to ask Siobhan because she was in our group and the rest of us didn't take notes or assign a speaker.
That's funny saying I was going to ask you.
I don't remember. Sorry.
Can you remember the comment you made about the authenticity and phrasing of the questions? Because I think that's where I thought that was fruitful.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I guess I remember a little bit. I think the pillars we were talking about was like family and community management. But I think just, when we were looking at the different questions in the spreadsheet about, what we asked students, most of them were open-ended questions, which I think is really helpful because I think we'll get more nuanced responses from students and, they're like less leading questions. But I was just saying to our group that while it's all of our intentions to be really authentic about asking students, for their ideas and feedback, sometimes it may not come across as such. And so I think we have to try really hard in that manner to say, we actually do want to hear from you, and how we frame the questions and how we even approach bringing in the student voice, I think is really important.
Absolutely. Most of the time, people shy away from doing interviews and focus groups because it's qualitative, right? This is data. You're looking at words, right? When you look at words, you have to take the time to read them and look at any trends. And it takes a little bit longer than just doing a survey that gives you the answers right away. But there's so much depth, there's so much meat, there's so much important information that our students can give us through interviews, and just give them a chance to voice their opinions on how they feel about their learning experience. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So before we even go into analyzing data, and this was a resource that was provided from us from our State Transformational Assistance Center, we need to make sure that we are focusing on collecting those priorities. What are our priorities going into analyzing the data? So how are we going to make meaning of the data? How will we be involved? What will we do to support? Once we get the information we need, what are the next steps? And are we noticing common themes emerging among the different groups of students that are answering the questions or providing us with the information? Next slide, please. So when we're making sense of data, there's two types of data that you have. You have your quantitative, when you're giving out surveys, you have getting the students to fill out a Likert scale, which is that 1 through 5, I agree, disagree. And then you have your qualitative data, which is what we just saw now. Student responses, interviews, focus group, opinions. So anytime you're doing qualitative data, coding is so important. And what is coding? Coding is basically creating and assigning labels to categorize the information that you're getting from responses when you're dealing with words and phrases and listening and transcripts. And when coding, you should already know, that's why we had those discussions before. What are things that we're looking for? And the things that you're looking for basically become your categories. And as you're noticing, that was a category that didn't come up when I thought about, you can add it. But the thing is, you have to have those discussions so you know what you're looking for as you're reading or listening to the information being given. And coding also drives your themes. So what are the themes? What are the trends that you're seeing coming out of the data and the responses? Next slide, please. After you code, This is where you identify themes and you start to think about those priorities. So, being that community schools is where we're at, what we're doing, we're transforming our schools into community hubs. It makes perfect sense that the themes are actually our pillars. Why? Because theming it in this matter makes us see where are we at with the different pillars across our framework. Do we see that we're kind of lacking in integrated supports, but we're real heavy in family and community engagement and extending learning time and opportunities, right? So theming them based on our pillars kind of give you an understanding of we need to balance. We need to make sure that we're doing as much as we can in all of our pillars to make sure that we're actually implementing an effective community schools model. And on top of that, it assists with that long-term transformation, right? Even though we have a grant that may be only 2 years or 5 years, we're building a community hub that's supposed to last the lifetime of the school. We're going to constantly be improving it on a year-to-year basis to make sure that we are transforming the school into a place that meets the whole needs of our children and our families. Next slide, please. When you are prioritizing, so we coded the data, we came up with themes, we put them under our pillars. Now we're trying to figure out of everything that we read, everything that we reviewed, what is our number one priority? What do we start off with? And they have what's called a priority matrix, is what you see before us, and it's broken up into 4 quadrants. And that quadrant that is green, that is considered your most high impact, your highly actionable, which means this is the one action that if I was to come up with a plan with and prioritize, it is something that can be long-term and sustained and will just help transform your school. And that's the quadrant that we aim for. So when you're looking at that, you're looking at focus. Where do I get the greatest impact for our students? Will it transform our school to that community hub that we like? Or do we already have things that we are prioritizing, but we can actually take to the next level? So those are things you're going to look at. But that green quadrant is important because you want highest impact, best action for the longest length of time. That is the ultimate goal. Next slide, please. So just looking at it just a little bit more in depth. Your top part, which is your x-axis, that potential for impact, you're looking at low and high. On the x-axis, where you see resource intensiveness, that's time, effort, money. You're looking again for that high impact, high time, effort. You put all that into it, you go get your biggest impact. So if you notice in the bottom quadrant on the right-hand side, you see highest priority for the lowest cost. You rarely see something that's a high priority that's going to cost you nothing. That is very rare that you see, which is why the top part above it, which is high priority, maybe only 1 or 2 per year, because those are long-term goals. Those are actions that if it's your long-term goals you achieve is going to sustain that community hub that you need for your community schools framework. So again, aiming at that quadrant, that's 2. The number 3 you see as a medium priority. Those are like short wins. So little things that you can do really, really quickly, but they have very low impact. They're not really doing anything that's going to transform your school to that community hub that you need. So again, focusing on that high impact, high resource intensive for our students. Next slide, please. So we are going to do a whole group activity. So I need everybody to just shake and wiggle all that data off because data is hard. I know that is a hard thing to review and it takes a lot of stamina. So we're going to do a whole group activity where we're all going to work together so you can get an idea of what does this look like? What is the practical part of this? And we're all going to participate. And I hope we are ready. So next slide, please. I'm going to give you an example of this process. So we ask the question, how can XYZ Middle School better support students when concerning bullying? What would you like to see, or what has been your experience? So we have 4 responses from students, just different ways they can answer. Student A response: my best friend is being picked on by another student, scared to talk to his parents about it. It'll be nice to have somewhere on campus to go anytime to get adult help. Student B: when I was bullied last year, I spoke to the counselor in the wellness center. It helped me a lot. I don't think a lot of kids know about this place. This should use if they get bullied. Student C: when I was little, we used to have bullying assemblies. They would tell us what to do if we were ever bullied. I learned a lot. We should have assemblies here. And the last student responds: Mrs. G is the best counselor ever. She works in a wellness center and has helped my friends when they were getting bullied. She even helped me when I was feeling down after my grandma passed away. So I want you to look at those responses. And these are examples of when students were interviewed about that question. Next slide, please. So based on the responses provided by the students about bullying, what were the main concerns expressed? You can drop them in the chat or say them aloud. What were some of the main responses expressed? Main concerns?
Students needed or had someone that they could talk to.
Exactly. They have someone they can go and talk to about the bullying incident.
And that they trusted and felt comfortable with.
Trusted and felt comfortable with, absolutely. Were there any other things that was noticed?
I'm sorry, something went wrong with my phone, but I noticed that there was a particular student that went to the wellness center, but he felt that, or he thought that a lot of people didn't know about this place, that a lot of students, so maybe lack of communication there can be an issue.
Okay. So if we can go 2 slides up. So when we were looking at this data, whenever you're looking at student responses, this is where we have to go through and see what are those important trends, and you guys hit them all. Student A main concern is there needs a place where you can go on campus and talk to an adult that can help you, right? Student B, counselor in the wellness center. That was huge. Student C, bullying assemblies. And then the last one, same thing, a counselor in the wellness center. So everything that you guys mentioned, yes, those were the main concerns. Next slide, please. So what, based on the themes given that we just came up with, they skipped, hold on. Go back a slide. Go back a slide. What are the possible themes for the answers provided by the students? We all mentioned them, but if you had to group them into themes, like a common concept, a common theme that came up, what do you think those would be?
Trust. Trust, a place where they belong.
Trust, a place where they belong. Any other common themes based on the data that we saw?
They were interested in integrated supports.
Okay.
Based on the
a place where they belong. So let's go to the next one. So when we're coming up with themes, you noticed on student A, a place where they can go on campus to talk anytime. So adult assistance, right? Adult that can help them.
Mm-hmm.
Counselor in a wellness center. Again, adult assistance, a place where you can go, the wellness center. The third student was focusing on bullying assemblies. And the last student, again, adult assistance and wellness center. So the common theme was, I need an adult and a place to go. And the place to go to them was the Wellness Center. So let's go to the next slide. So one of the pillars was already mentioned. So based on the themes given, which community school pillar would be the best fit? Someone said integrated supports. Was there any other pillar that you've seen that may be an asset? Or where these themes would fit?
Can they all
Leadership and practices for educators as well?
Leadership and practices for educators. Okay, anybody else?
share leadership? Because since we're talking about giving students a voice and a place,
anyone else? Those are good ones. So let's go to the next slide. So those themes have the ability to actually meet 3 pillars, depending upon what your school priorities are. So for integrated student supports, obviously, if they're asking about bullying, and that's one of the interview questions, it must be a school priority. So it seems like they would be in need of a bullying prevention program, which is a need. The asset that they have is that they already have a wellness center. So there's some opportunities for growth with that asset. With the active family and community engagement, we may want to do some bullying prevention workshops for parents. So families have an idea of how they can assist their student. And then again, maybe a health and wellness community fair, right? So the parents can learn about the wellness center and the benefits of it and encourage their scholars to go. And the last one that was mentioned, which you guys did mention, was collaborative leadership and practices. If you have a PBIS leadership team on campus, they can help build your bullying prevention program. That is part of PBIS. If you have a school leadership team on campus, that's an asset because they can also assist with this. So the whole activity that we just went through, that is the example of how you would take that qualitative data, how you would go through it and find what the main concerns are, figure out the themes, see what themes came up the most, and how are they based on priorities going into the California Community School pillars. So that is an example of how you would do it. I know sometimes it seems like a little bit difficult for that. It's not really difficult, it's just time consuming anytime you deal with any kind of transcripts or interviews, but it's doable and you get so much valuable information. It's awesome. Next slide, please. So we are at the end. So we're going to have our optimistic closure, and our optimistic closure for today is, next slide, please. What are you curious to learn more about? You've had this wonderful presentation on student voice, the importance of it, why we need it, the cultural relevance piece of it, the ideas of how student voice can really lead to us transforming our schools into community hubs. You got how do we look at the data from student voice. So seeing all of this information, what are you more curious to learn about?
I see a lot of disconnectedness with the students. I think it's been difficult, especially since COVID. But we're just seeing so much disconnectedness, not just with adults, but with each other.
Anything else? Any other input? I would love to hear as many voices as we can, or you can also drop it in the chat. So we heard about the disconnectedness, things that we can do. Are there anything else, things people are curious about? I'm curious to learn about how to talk with the steering committee about 75 to 100% engagement, how using all these ways of connecting with students gets to that engagement level. Absolutely. Our students need to be engaged through the whole process. Again, we are working with our students. We're not doing school to our students, right? We're working together as one. Thank you so much, Serena, for that.
I am curious to learn more about what other districts are doing with their community schools funding in terms of ideas that we could probably implement in our own district.
Awesome. Anyone else? Okay, let's go to the next slide, please. So next month, just kind of a heads up, we really, really hope that you join us for our Community of Transformational Practice and our peer webinar learning series. We're going to have voices from the field next month. So just like you've asked about what are other community schools doing or what are other people doing to transform their schools to community schools, we're going to have voices from the field and you're going to receive an update on the specifics on what we'll be talking about, but we are going to talk about experiences from the ground, boots on the ground experience. So we really hope that you guys join us for that. Also, we are still going to have our Community of Transformational Practice. We know this is close to your break, so if you are able to join us, that would be amazing. As you know, the implementation grant request for application officially dropped on Monday. We'll be having day 2 of the implementation grant workshop for our grantees that are in planning cohort 1 or any other district or school that would like to apply for this implementation grant. You are more than welcome to attend. Also, meet and greet sessions. Our phone campaign is here. We're going to be reaching out to schools, to districts, just so you know that we are here. We are ready to visit. We're ready to help you and get our boots on the ground with you so we can make sure that we are working together to transform our schools to that community hub that our families and students deserve. Also, you're going to see a lot of links in the chat that are very, very important, and you can copy and paste it. We will also be sending out an email following this that will have that same information as well. We want your feedback. Please scan that code if you're able to. You can also use the link. We just want to make sure that the more we hear from you with questions, feedback, the better we are with supporting your needs and making sure that these webinars and these sessions are geared towards you. Also, there was a leadership podcast that happened with the manager director for community schools, Hayne Kimner, which is very, very, very enlightening. That link has also dropped, and we will also make sure to email that out to you. There are no questions in our parking lot. We respect your time. Do you have any questions for us that you would like to shoot from the floor or in the chat? We are more than happy to answer that for you right now, if you would like. If not, we appreciate everyone coming out today. We appreciate your hard work with doing all you can to transform your districts and your schools to community hubs because our children and families deserve it. Thanks again for coming with us. We have our director, Jennifer Gately, here. We have our program manager, David Coberhouse, behind the scenes, helping us with the slides. Our wonderful coordinator, Siobhan Monterosa, my counterpart, myself, and also behind the scenes, Stephanie Mahe, who's also helping us with the webinar. We are all here to support you and we appreciate you coming out. Thank you so, so much for joining us. And we hope that you have an amazing evening.